I will give a talk about a proposed new unified hazard banding, which is in accordance with the new chemical regulations. So the content of my talk will be, at first I will tell you something about the new chemical regulations, the timeline of the globally harmonized systems, and about what has changed with those new regulations. And in the main part of my talk, I will give you then the rationales behind hazard banding and our proposed GHS compliant hazard banding scheme, where I show you which hazard bands we used, something about the route-specific assignment, and I also give you an example of a simplified hazard banding scheme for eye damage, and a few examples how this new approach works in general, and at the end I will give you some outlook to future developments. So at first, what has changed? So the changes are the globally harmonized system. This is a chemical law that was passed by the United Nations in 2002 in the so-called Purple Book, and this was the United Nations globally harmonized systems. This legislation should ensure that all over the world all chemicals are classified and labeled according to the same standards and rules. In 2008, the European Union implemented this rule by the CLP regulation. This is the regulation for classification and packing and labeling of chemicals. And those legislations say that from the 1st of December 2010, all chemical substances, so pure substances, that were brought into the market or sold have to be labeled in accordance to these new regulations. And from June on of this year, also all mixtures, that means all chemical products that are sold and used, have to be classified and labeled according to these new CLP regulations. And if you look at the calendar, you will see that there are only 3 months left when only the CLP and the GHS legislations are the legal ones. So this is not long ago from now. So what has now actually changed? In the former legislations, the Dangerous Substance Directive, so these are European legislations, and the Dangerous Preparations Directive, the hazards of a substance or the danger of a substance are displayed on the label by those orange danger symbols. I think everybody knows them. With the new legislations, they are replaced by so-called hazard pictograms. Those are those red pictograms with, for example, exclamation mark or this or the skull. Another thing that has changed, in the former legislation, there were identifications of danger and categories of danger, for example, very toxic substances or corrosive substances. In the new legislations, those changed to hazard classes and hazard categories. So the hazard classes are now, for example, acute toxicity or skin corrosion, and the hazard category somehow shows how severe this effect is. So this acute toxicity category 2 is more severe than category 3, but less severe than category 1. And this is the general scheme. And a third thing that has changed in the hazard communication, in the former legislation we had risk phrases, for example, R25, toxic is swallowed, or the other ones. And with the new legislations, now we have hazard statements. They begin with an H, and for example, H301, toxic if swallowed, H380 causes serious eye damage, or H335 may cause respiratory irritation. So, and if you look at these changes, then you can conclude that hazard banding schemes that applying the hazard communication elements from the old legislations have to be adapted to this new rule, since in 3 months only the new classification and labeling is available to everybody that uses chemicals. So now, and for this we wanted to suggest improved hazard banding that complies to these new legislations, and to do this, we looked at the rationales behind the concept of hazard banding. The most important thing for hazard banding is that you have to assign the hazard bands tiered according to the severity of the underlying hazard. So, and to do this, at first we looked at the commonly used hazard bands from A to E. The severity is there from low hazard to medium hazard, high hazard, very high hazard, or extremely high hazard, and then the health hazards that can occur while handling chemical substances have to be assigned to those bands. So you can see here, for example, the acute toxic substances, harmful substances are only a medium hazard, while toxic substances are high hazard, and fatal substances are very high hazard. So there you can see the graduation. Also, the corrosion is has a higher severity than only irritation to the skin or something else. But as you can see here, there's an empty field, and these are all health hazards, but there are other hazard statements that, for example, describe physiochemical hazards or environmental hazards. And to give a complete overview of all hazards, health hazards, then they can also be assigned to a hazard band, but since they don't describe health hazard, the hazard band will be not applicable. So they don't describe health hazard is meant by this. And this hazard band can also be used for extremely diluted products. Since if you dilute most of the products to an infinite level, then they are not harmful at all. So you can also assign not applicable to very diluted products. Examples are later in this talk. So after the tiered assignment to the severity of the hazard, the next thing you have to look at is the exposure route that is concerned. Because hazard banding is normally used in control banding tools, and those tools give advices to risk management measures. And to give advice for risk management measures, you have to be route specific, since if you have a substance that is toxic while by inhalation, gloves won't help you at all. So you can't give advice with gloves if you need a mask. So we looked at different exposure routes, the eyes for eye damage, then the inhalative exposure and local skin damage, which, for example, can occur by corrosives, and also the skin absorption of chemicals that then have health effect inside the body, but are absorbed through the skin. And from these hazard bands, there's also the possibility of an derivation of hazard of risk management measures for the eyes. This I will show you also. So here a few examples about what I mean with route specificity. The first hazard statement I want to show you is the H340 causes severe skin burns and eye damage. And if you look at the hazard banding, this is clear, then it's a very high hazard in the case of inhalation and also for skin damage. If you look at the column skin uptake, the corrosive effect does not describe a health hazard when uptaking the chemicals through the skin, so there is NA assigned. If you look at the respiratory irritation, at first you see the letters are only B and A, so this is lower, and you see irritation is not that severe than corrosion, but here you also see this is a hazard statement concerning inhalative uptake. So for the inhalative route, we assigned it to hazard band B, moderate hazard. For the local skin damage, since skin is not that sensitive like nose or mouth, the mucosa, we only assigned it to hazard band A, low hazard in the case of skin contact. The allergic skin reaction is assigned to very high hazard in the case of local skin damage and also skin absorption, but since allergic reactions can also occur while inhaling such substances, also the inhalative route is concerned with a high hazard. Acute toxicity is a special case, since they are acute toxicity is checked for 3 different uptake routes, and those hazard statements are uptake route specific. So if you have an inhalative hazard statement, you only assign it to the inhalation route. If you have a hazard statement in contact with skin, toxic, then you only assign it to the skin uptake route. But if you have an swallowed, so oral uptake route, then this is the easiest test to perform. So we also think that this test is always performed, but this does not distinguish between skin and inhalation. So if only an oral statement is there, both uptake routes, inhalation and skin are concerned. And for the eyes, as I said, a simplified hazard banding scheme is possible, since for the eyes it's not really necessary to make a big exposure analysis. There's only a possibility it hits the eyes, or it's not possible to hit the eyes. And also everything that can come into the eyes is at least a moderate hazard for the eyes, so the hazard bands A and not applicable are not used for eye damage. So all substances with any hazard statement or no hazard statement at all at least gets hazard band B. Irritating is seen as a high hazard, and the damage by corrosion is seen as a very high hazard, and the carcinogenic and mutagenic effects always have to be avoided, so they are extremely high hazard. And since there is no need for a detailed exposure analysis in case of eye contact, you also can derive directly from those hazard bands risk management measures. So here an example for possible measures. If you assign those hazard bands, so if you assign hazard band A, then normally the people should avoid the substance in all cases, and experts are required. And then in graduation to the severity, you can derive other measures. So if it's only a moderate hazard, then you should advise the people to wear glasses. If it's a moderate, high hazard, then glasses must be worn. And if it's a very high hazard like acids or such things, then normal safety glasses are not enough, so you have to give advices for special safety goggles or such things. Those examples I took out from German rules for eye protection from our colleagues from the BGRCE, for example. So, now for the application of this hazard banding, you need to know the programs that apply this need to know which hazards can occur, and the primary source of this information to the users of chemicals are the material safety data sheets of the products, the safety data sheet, SDS. And the advantage of the safety data sheets in comparison to the label is that in the safety data sheets a distinction between all hazard categories made. So on the label you only see H314, severe eye damage and skin burns. But in the safety data sheets there are categories A, 1A and 1B, so you can make a little more distinguishing between those categories if available. And the safety data sheets have to be, according to the REACH regulations, also have to be correct, so the people can be sure that they enter correct information. So, and now to the examples, how does the banding scheme works on a real chemical. I choose acetic anhydride and took the classification from the BGRCE, so from the chemical industry, and they classify the acetic anhydride with the pictograms flame, skull, and this corrosion symbol. The signal word is danger, and the classification is it's a flammable liquid, it's acute toxic, category 3 oral, category 3 inhalative, and it's a strong skin corrosive, and it's irritating of the respiratory tract. And if you, first assignment is for the eye damage. This is very simple. The first three hazard statements don't indicate a special hazard to the eyes. So as I said, anything in the eyes is a danger, so the hazard band will be B, but the skin corrosive effect is a very high hazard to the eye, so this hazard band would be D. The irritating effect would be C, and if you then take the overall hazard band for the eyes, it would be the D, very high hazard, and therefore you can advise your employees to wear safety goggles, for example, if handling acetic anhydride. Now for the other possible exposure routes. The hazard statement flammable liquids is very easy to assign since it describes no health hazard, so the hazard statement NA is applied for all uptake routes or possible contamination routes. Acute toxicity category 4, oral, harmful if swallowed, is assigned, since it's harmful, to hazard band B in the case of inhalative uptake or skin uptake. But, as I said before, we have an exposure route specific hazard statement, acute toxicity category 3, inhalative. This is toxic if inhaled. And so for the inhalative route, this substance won't get an hazard band B, but hazard band C due to this statement. The skin corrosive effect, category 1B, also gives a high hazard in case of inhalation and local skin damage. And this skin respiratory irritation will give the B and A in the case of those two exposure paths. And if you then look at the overall hazard banding, you see that in the case of inhalative uptake or local skin damage, acetic anhydride will possess a high hazard, hazard band C, and in case of skin uptake, so the risk that something happens in the body when the substance comes through the skin is only a moderate hazard. No problem. So, the last thing you have to take into account when applying hazard banding is that the products are not only used pure while handled, but can also be diluted, and this also has to be taken into account. So, we also try to use a dilution scheme. This only applies for sure if the products are diluted with harmless diluents, like, for example, water. And then we use the dilution rules from the legislation, CLP or GHS. And the hazard band NA, as I said before, is then assigned when the products are self-diluted below the concentration limits for labeling in those regulations. As an example, here the hazard statements for skin corrosion or skin irritation. Above 5% of concentration of such a product, the skin corrosive hazard will be hazard band D, very high hazard. If you dilute a corrosive product below 5%, then the regulations say it has to be labeled like a skin irritant, so we consequently assign the hazard band for skin irritants to the skin corrosive products that are diluted below the concentration range of 5%. And below 1%, the regulations say it don't have to be labeled at all, so we also take this concentration limit. One exception of this rule are the carcinogenic and mutagenic substances, since you can't be sure, even in a very, very diluted state, that those substances does not cause harm. So the lowest hazard band those substances can get, also while diluting below the concentration limit, which is here 0.1%, will be B, a moderate hazard, also for very diluted substances. So, and what are the plans with this hazard banding? Reviewed publication is accepted for publication in the Regulatory Toxicology and Pharmacology that describes the whole scheme I gave here and all special cases you can find there. And the international control banding and risk management tool Stoffenmanager, and with it its German version, the Gästestoffmanager, will implement this hazard banding scheme into its control banding functionality. And with this, we can assure that all users over Europe that are applying Stoffenmanager use the same scientific basic for hazard banding. And due to our check with the regulations, that we also assure that those risk assessments are in compliance with those new regulations, GHS, CLP, and also the REACH regulation. And in future, we also plan some evaluation studies. They were performed before for other hazard banding schemes, where you correlate the hazard band with possible concentrations limits of known substances. This could be the occupational limit values or also the new denial values from REACH. And with this, we want to evaluate our hazard banding scheme and also find possibilities to improve it if we find big difference between the correlation in these correlation studies. So this it was, and so thank you for your attention, and I hope that our banding scheme does not end up like they discuss it in this internet comic.